Hey everyone, ready to dive into some crypto news?
You bet.
Awesome. Today, we're zeroing in on the stuff that matters most to you, especially if you're a retail investor or just a crypto fan in general.
Sounds good.
We've got a stack of recent headlines, and we'll be focusing on a few key things. The Bitcoin ETF boom, a really cool new API that might make your crypto life easier, and we'll even take a peek at how MicroStrategy's big Bitcoin gamble is playing out.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's kick things off with this whole Bitcoin ETF craze. It's been huge news, right?
Definitely. And what's really fascinating is how much influence retail investors, everyday people like you, are having on the crypto market these days. It's not just the big institutions calling the shots anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And the Bitcoin ETF thing is the perfect example. Get this. Almost 80% of the assets in those spot Bitcoin ETFs are held by non-institutional investors.
That's huge.
That means everyday investors, you guys, are the ones driving this massive growth.
It's true. And the numbers are really impressive. We're talking about $21.6 billion just pouring into these ETFs in the 10 months since they launched back in January.
Wow.
It shows that a lot of people are seeing ETFs as a pretty easy and convenient way to get exposure to Bitcoin.
It's like, why bother setting up a wallet and dealing with all those keys when you can just buy an ETF through your regular brokerage account?
Right. Yeah, exactly. ETFs offer that familiar, regulated structure that a lot of retail investors are comfortable with.
Right. And you know what? It even seems like some people are moving their Bitcoin from personal wallets and exchanges into these ETFs.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It makes sense, though, right? ETFs can offer diversification, professional management, and maybe even a bit more peace of mind.
Yeah, I think it boils down to potentially less risk and an easier way to manage their Bitcoin.
For sure. Even though retail investors are dominating the Bitcoin ETF scene right now, we are seeing some growing interest from institutions too, like Divine advisors and hedge funds are starting to poke around. So it'll be really interesting to see how that balance shifts over time.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
Oh, and speaking of interesting developments, have you heard about Etherscan's new API update?
Okay, so full disclosure, when I first saw that headline, I was like, API, what does that even mean for me? But then I dug a little deeper and realized, whoa, this is actually a pretty big deal, especially if you're into checking out all the different blockchains out there.
It is a big deal. It's like, imagine being able to access data from tons of different blockchain networks, all with one API key. Kind of like having a universal remote control for all your crypto stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's wild. So instead of needing a separate key for every single blockchain you want to interact with,
Yeah.
you can now use just one key to access data from Ethereum, BNB Smart Chain, Polygon, Arbitrum, you name it, even their testnets, all from one place. It's pretty crazy.
It is. And for developers, it's like a dream come true. Etherscan's basically a Google search engine for blockchain data, and this update makes it so much easier for them to build applications that work smoothly across all these different chains.
So for us non-developers, the everyday crypto folks, what's the big takeaway here? What does this mean for us?
Well, think of it this way. This update could lead to easier to use wallets, the ones we use every day, and it could mean more innovative DeFi apps. Those are decentralized finance apps, just in case you're not familiar,
Yeah.
and just overall more opportunities to explore the broader crypto world.
More opportunities. I'm always up for that.
Right.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second, get a quick update on the whole Ripple situation. Remember that. The SEC was not too happy with Ripple selling XRP to institutions, claiming those were unregistered securities offerings.
Yeah, and that ended up costing Ripple a pretty penny, like $125 million in fines.
Ouch.
But they're fighting back. They've actually filed an appeal specifically targeting how the court applied the Howey test.
Now, for anyone who needs a refresher, the Howey test is basically the legal yardstick they use to determine if a transaction qualifies as an investment contract. So Ripple's argument is that those institutional XRP sales shouldn't be categorized that way.
Right. It's a pretty nuanced argument, and the outcome of this appeal could really change how XRP is regulated moving forward. And it might even set some precedents for other cryptocurrencies, too. It's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking of different approaches to crypto, let's talk about two corporate giants who are doing things their own way with Bitcoin, Microsoft and MicroStrategy.
This is where it gets really interesting.
On one hand, you've got Microsoft. They're actually facing pressure from their own shareholders to jump into the Bitcoin game.
Yeah, there's a shareholder proposal out there demanding that Microsoft at least explore adding Bitcoin to its balance sheet.
But it seems like the board isn't quite convinced yet.
Yeah, they're recommending that shareholders vote against the proposal. Their argument is that they're already evaluating a bunch of different investment assets, including Bitcoin.
Okay, so they're not ruling it out completely. But then, on the other hand, we have MicroStrategy. They went all in on Bitcoin. And you know what? It seems like that gamble is paying off big time. Their stock is on fire, recently hitting a 25-year high of $236.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And get this, MicroStrategy is actually outperforming Microsoft right now. Their stock has surged over 5,570% since it was listed on NASDAQ. Compare that to Microsoft's gain of 1,467% during the same time.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive David and Goliath story.
Yeah.
So as retail investors, what can we learn from these two very different approaches to Bitcoin?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, MicroStrategy's success is definitely tied to that bold Bitcoin strategy. It's high risk, but obviously there's a lot of potential reward there too.
Yeah, for sure.
But Microsoft, they're playing it a bit safer, maybe waiting to see how those regulations shake out before they really jump in.
Right, makes sense. Two companies, two philosophies, two totally different outcomes. It's pretty fascinating to see how these big players are navigating the crypto world,
Yeah. It really just goes to show you there's no one right way to approach crypto.
Yeah, exactly. What works for one company or one investor might not be the right fit for another.
Right, and it highlights how things are still up in the air when it comes to companies adopting crypto. Some are diving in head first, others are just dipping their toes in.
Definitely. I think it's a good reminder for us as retail investors to do our homework, figure out our risk tolerance, and choose the strategies that make sense for our own goals.
Couldn't agree more. Now, before we move on, let's loop back to that SEC case against Ripple for a minute.
Oh yeah, that appeal they filed regarding the institutional XRP sales.
It's important to understand that Ripple isn't actually fighting the whole SEC ruling, you know? They're really focusing on how the court used that Howey test on those specific sales to the big institutions.
So they're not saying they never sold XRP as an unregistered security, right?
Yeah.
But they're saying those particular sales to big institutions shouldn't fall into that category.
Precisely. It's a really subtle argument, and it could have a big impact on how they use the Howey test in future crypto cases.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little tricky for us everyday investors, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm no legal expert.
True, but that's exactly why it's so important to stay informed and, maybe get some advice from people you trust when you're making investment decisions. This whole crypto landscape is still evolving, and the regulations are definitely a work in progress.
Absolutely. So as we wait for all that to play out, what are some of the key takeaways for retail investors and crypto fans from today's deep dive? What should we be thinking about?
Well, I think we've really seen how much influence retail investors like you are having on the market. Plus, there are all those exciting advancements happening with blockchain accessibility, like that Etherscan API we talked about. And then, of course, we're seeing how differently companies are approaching crypto adoption.
It's been really interesting to see those retail investors driving the demand for those Bitcoin ETFs, Etherscan making it easier to navigate the multi-chain world, and then those companies like MicroStrategy just killing it with their big Bitcoin bet, while others like Microsoft are still playing it safe.
It's definitely a dynamic and exciting time to be involved with crypto, and these trends are really shaping the future of the industry.
For sure. As we wrap up, let's leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. As retail investors continue to shape the crypto landscape, what do you think the future holds for Bitcoin ETFs, blockchain accessibility, and corporate adoption? What are you most excited about seeing happen next?
And remember, everyone, the world of crypto is constantly changing and evolving, so stay curious, keep learning, and keep exploring.